Few more minutes?
Yeah.
Hi, Francois.
Until 35?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there are still people.
Nice.
All right.
Lovely. Let's try and keep the videos off if possible, just to save our internet if possible.
All right. Then we can start.
Yeah, we can start. Sure. Okay. So again, welcome everybody to the first conservation chat. I am your moderator for today. My name's Alicia Northcott. First of all, we're going to introduce the organisers and the hosts of the event, Bene and Kieran. So I'll hand over to Bene first to introduce himself so you know who he is.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this conservation chat. So my name is Bene. I'm a marine conservationist and the sustainable financing specialist for the marine program at Fauna Flora International based in Cambodia. I'm really happy to see all of you here. I see familiar faces. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Kieran, our co-organizer.
Welcome everyone. I'm Kieran. I'm also the co-organizer of this event. I'm also a marine biologist, and I'm working for as a consultant for the conservation program in Cambodia of Fauna and Flora International. So yeah, it'll be great to hear from our speakers, and thank you all for coming.
Awesome. So now you know who the organisers are. A little bit about myself. I'm an animal biologist and I work as a tour guide for Wildlife Alliance, also in Cambodia. I'm passionate about environmental and conservation education and finding innovative ways of relaying conservation messages to people and to different groups of people as well. And finally, introducing you guys. So we have people here from all over the world, people registered from US, Trinidad and Tobago, UK, the Netherlands, all across Europe, Kenya, Sri Lanka and the Philippines as well as many, many more countries. And there's people joining us who are studying lots of different things. So we have animal behavior, zoology, marine biology, forestry, and environmental biomedical sciences, both at undergraduate level and master's level. So, and also some people are already in the field. So wherever you come from, whatever your background is, we would like to welcome you to the chat and thank you for taking the time to come. And we hope that you get something out of it as well. Today we're aiming to provide a platform for students and recent graduates to chat about what is new in the conservation field. What you can expect from today. So we have 3 speakers. Each will speak for 15 to 20 minutes to tell their story about what they do and how their work contributes to conservation. Today is specifically digital based. After which, after each speaker, the floor will be opened to 2 to 3 questions that Bene and Kieran will be choosing. And in between speakers 2 and 3, we will have a 5-minute break. But please, during that time, stay connected to Zoom and don't go offline. We have a lot of people waiting, so you might lose your place if you leave. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping to help this run as smoothly as possible. Please try to turn off your video for the duration of this so that we can save on bandwidth to make sure that the talks go smoothly. The hosts will keep your microphones muted, and this is to stop the speakers being interrupted. But yeah, please put your questions in the chat box during the talk, and Kieran and Bene will choose those while the speaker is still speaking. We are recording the whole chat, already recording it, and we all upload it to YouTube so that you can view it again if you want to, and also so that people in time zones where they are unable to view this can view it as well. During the break and between speakers 2 and 3, we're going to have a poll. If Bene could put the poll live now, that would be great. Please take a look at this and put your vote in, and then I will announce the answer after the break. Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. Let's get started with the speakers. So we've got 3 different speakers from different parts of the world, and all with different roles in conservation. We have Blane Edwards, an architect turned digital conservationist. We have Andrew Ball, marine biologist and photographer. And we also have Florian Rehm, an innovator and entrepreneur. Firstly, the first speaker today will be Blane Edwards. He is the digital conservationist behind Earth Offline on Instagram and Conservation Tribe podcast, available on Apple Podcast. He's an architect, but his passion for animal conservation brought him to create these conservation projects. So over to you, Blane, when you're ready.
Yep. Okay. Yes, camera's on. What's up, everyone? Thank you all for tuning in and taking the time to have a conservation chat. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to share my story with you all. It's a little bit different to the norm. And because of that, I'm hoping that there's a little bit of value in sharing that story. So I only have 20 minutes, I believe, so I'm going to dive straight in. What I'm going to do first is share a screen. Okay, I'm sharing a screen. Okay, maximize. Alrighty, so as you can see from the screen, my name is Blane and I'm a digital conservationist. So what does that mean? To be honest, I don't 100% know. I'm still trying to figure that out, but based on kind of my experience so far, I define a conservationist as being a person who leverages the digital world to advocate or act for the protection and preservation of the natural world. So this is something that the niche that I'm currently working in at the moment, in a nutshell, I leverage the digital world, and that can take many shapes and sizes in order to protect and conserve the natural world. So just to break that down a little bit into something that you can probably wrap your head around what that actually means. So one real world use case for this is using the digital world for communication. So one thing that I do is I leverage content in combination with social media in order to communicate a conservation science in a better way, communicated in a better way for the general public. So using it as a tool to bridge the gap between conservation science and the general public, because that's obviously very important. And another use case is in terms of creating community. So community is obviously very important in all different industries, including conservation. So I leverage social media and communication platforms like Zoom, for example, what we're using now, in order to create digital communities. And I use that with the hopes to not only connect conservationists, but build meaningful relationships and also to collaborate as well. So unify our different skill sets in order to create a larger impact, an impact that is greater than if you did it individually. So I have my own community called Conservation Tribe. And the premise behind that is to build a tribe of conservationists from all different industries, because in my opinion, anyone can be a conservationist. So that's what I do. That is one version of the digital conservationist. There are obviously many other versions of it, just like you'd see in the real world. So in the real world, from a more traditional conservationist point of view, there's many different versions of that as well. And so the same applies for digital conservation. And in my opinion, that is a very beautiful thing, this idea that there's a diverse range, there's diversity in the impact that we can have. every conservation is a complex problem, and because of that, there are many different problems to solve. And one could be in the form of digital communication, another could be in science. There's a range of problems to solve, and because of that reason, there's, I think, a role for many people to play in conservation. So moving on to the next slide. So before, let's kind of rewind a little bit and go through my story and step through how I got here, I guess. So in the top left corner here, that's me. So I'm from New Zealand, I'm a Kiwi. I'm Indigenous New Zealander, so I'm a Māori. And every Māori in New Zealand has a tribe and a sub-tribe and a marae, which is like a meeting house. So that's my meeting house. And I included this slide because my Māori culture is, I think, important for me and my relationship with conservation. So in Māori mythology, we literally believe that the nature, so the earth, the sky, the trees, animals, we believe that they are literally an extension of our family. They are part of our extended family. And that's something that I hold quite true to myself today. So I thought I'd include that slide. Even though I was born in New Zealand, I moved to Australia when I was 7. And I have always been passionate about conservation, specifically animals. I've got a soft spot for animals. But in high school, as a teenager, I didn't really know, I guess, how I could turn that into a career, I guess. In my mind, in high school, there were 2 main pathways. One pathway was to be like a field biologist, which interested me in a couple of different ways, but didn't really tick all the boxes for me as a human. And the other pathway was to be David Attenborough. And he's obviously a legend, but it seemed a bit out of reach. He's one person, there's many humans outside of me, and it just seemed like if I went down that pathway, it'd be too great of a goal to reach. So instead, I looked at another interest of mine, which was to think about a problem. So thinking of ideas and then building upon those ideas and turning them into something that is real. So that's led me to go to architecture school. So I studied architecture. And this photo here, I think you can see my cursor, is my very last project at architecture school. It was a forest lookout in a forest just south of Perth in Australia, the west coast of Australia. So that was good. Moving on to the next one, that's me graduating. That was all good. Finally, getting a piece of paper from all the time and energy spent at university is always good, turning that into some recognizable paper. And then after that, I traveled with my girlfriend around Southeast Asia. And that was an important part of my journey for a couple of reasons. Not only, one reason is just general exposure to new things, new cultures and new ideologies. But also it exposed me to the darker side of wildlife tourism. So when we went to Thailand, at the time I was completely oblivious to some of the unethical practices that can occur in that industry. And that kind of took me by surprise a bit and sparked something inside of my belly that rekindled that desire to protect animals. So looking back at that moment, I consider that a bit of a turning point was these eye-opening experiences with the wildlife tourism industry. So anyway, that rekindled that desire, but I returned back to Australia and continued working as an architect, as you do. This was the last project I worked on, a big new shopping centre. Grateful for the opportunity to be involved in this. But after that completed, I felt as if I went through a bit of a reflection phase, and I felt as if there was more to my life than building things, like building buildings, I guess. it didn't feel like it was my purpose. So I started to reflect. I mean, this is a thought that everyone has, right? Everyone wonders, what am I doing? Like, what is my purpose in life? This is a very common question that everyone asks themselves. But it's also a pretty intimidating question to explore. But I decided to give it a crack. And so I started to reflect and ask the questions, what is purpose? Like, what is my purpose? What does that mean? What does that look like for me? And so we'll move on to the next slide. So at the beginning of last year, I went through this phase of seeking purpose. And that involved, like I mentioned, reflection, reading a bit, watching a lot. I'm more of a watcher than a reader, but eventually came to the idea that purpose for me is the intersection of something that you're passionate about, something that you're good at, something that can make you money, and something that can add value to the world. So I had this general framework around what purpose could look like. So I started to explore potentially what that could be for me. So I started thinking about conservation. I was like, okay, conservation, I've always been passionate about this. I didn't really know how I could turn this into a career, but let's explore conservation and see if I could find purpose within that space. So the first thing I decided to do was to see if there was a problem that I could solve. So the adding value. So the adding value is the previous model here. You can think of value as solving a problem. That's pretty much what value is, solving a problem. So I asked myself the question, what conservation problem can I solve? And I think this is something that all conservationists can ask. If you're already in the space or thinking of becoming, getting involved in the space, is asking yourself the question, what conservation problems exist and what problems can I solve given my experience and skill set? So at this point, from outside of looking into conservation, so just bear in mind at this point I had no science experience. I was an architecture student, so that is my background. It's not in conservation, anything wildlife related or environmental related for that matter. But from outside of looking in, there seemed to be a disconnect between the conservation science and the general public. There was a disconnect between those two worlds. And that's obviously a problem. And when I look at it, it's a communication problem. There's a communication problem between the science and the public. So I started asking myself the question, if it is a communication problem, let's break that down. Let's actually figure out what that actually means. Let's break down all those layers and get to the root. And so I asked myself the question first, where do people communicate? And a lot of the time these days, it's on the internet, on social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, for example. And then I asked myself the question, how do people communicate on these social media platforms? And they communicate in the form of content. And this was a light switch moment for me. Communication and content in today's day and age are effectively synonymous. They're interchangeable, they're the same thing. And then I asked myself the question, what is content? And content can take many forms. It can take the form of a video, a podcast, a photo, an animation, a TikTok, a meme, a documentary, a movie. It can take all these shapes and sizes, all these different forms. But the content and communication are the same thing. So given that kind of light switch moment, this idea that content is communication, I used all this new information and just try to see if I could then plug that into this purpose model. So this again is the purpose model, and I looked at strengths. Obviously I spelled strength wrong here. Don't judge me. Strength spelling is obviously not one of my strengths. But for me, it was creating digital content. So at architecture school, as part of the curriculum, they teach us how to use a range of different design software like Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, all these things. They kind of expose us to a range of different design softwares and methodologies. So I knew that I could do that somewhat. I wasn't an expert, but I was reasonably good. I was good enough at least. And the passion part was I was passionate about wildlife conservation. The money, I knew in theory I could make money in the space. I didn't know how exactly, but I knew it was possible. I could potentially make money through podcasting. So get the podcast to a point where I could monetize it through ads and sponsorships or something. If I am creating content, I could sell some of that content potentially. And then another idea was creating an eco-social media agency. So by being a digital communicator, you learn tricks around using social media, around digital marketing. And those skills can be used in order to create a separate business. And that's actually what I've done for myself. So I've started a eco-social media agency with the skills that I've learnt through trying to find a pathway through conservation. So even that in itself is pretty interesting in my opinion. And then the value, again, as we touched on before, for me, it was bridging that gap between the science and the general public. So amplifying conservation through digital marketing and digital communication, I guess. And so that was a good feeling, knowing that I could potentially find, at least in theory, find purpose, at least in my definition, I could find purpose while being a conservationist. And that was a massive realization for me, and that was enough for me to go all in. And that was enough for me to commit to trying to transition from an architect to a conservationist. And that move is not easy because I've invested a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of energy into going through architecture school. You know, there's a bachelor, there's undergrad component, there's a master's component, and to go through all of that and then to come to this idea that maybe I'll do something else. That is tricky. But for me personally, I looked into the future a little bit and tried to visualize my life in 20 years from now. And I didn't want that person to regret not listening to these moments in my life, and I didn't want to have any regret. So I just decided to go all in because I knew in the pit of my belly that this was something that I wanted to do and I could add a lot of value. So I decided to do it. However, so that led me to pursuing this idea of a digital conservationist. So I'm fairly new in this space. When I decided to commit, I decided to start a podcast. And my first podcast was about a year ago, not long ago. I think the first early May was when I did my first podcast. And because I started late to this conservation world, I needed like to hack. I needed like a networking hack because I knew no one in the space, like 0 people. I needed like a networking hack so that I could meet people, and I needed a way to make content pretty efficiently. So that led me to the podcast, because podcasts are great because I'm going into more technical stuff now, but I think this is an important part of my story, so I want to share it. I didn't know anyone in the space, so I needed a strategy to know people and quickly. And an option could be to email people and be like, hey, I'm entering the space. Can we have a coffee? Can we have a Zoom call and chat about it? That is probably not going to work out because they get those requests all the time. So my take was, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to reach out to these conservation organizations and say, hey, I have a conservation podcast. I'm interviewing change makers and thought leaders in the conservation space. Would you like to be part of that? Would you mind if I interview you and be a part of this podcast? those people are more likely to get involved in that podcast when you frame it like that, if that makes sense. Like, they're less likely to collaborate with you if you just ask for something, but if you spin it in a way that they get something in return by being a guest, you're more likely to get a response and you're more likely to have that collaboration. So that was the concept, and that ended up working. And week by week, I'm meeting new people, more conservationists, and a year later, I'm doing podcasts with like genuine experts in their field and directors and founders of world-leading conservation organizations, and that's and I think that just goes to show the power of social media and the power of the internet, and the fact that it is a very important tool for us as conservationists, especially in the era that we live in today. So I just want to, sorry, something happened there. So I think that's the end of my talk. I've got my timer here. We're running out, but that's pretty much the end of my journey. I just want to quickly summarize by saying that I think I'm new to the space. I've got a lot to learn. But what I've learned so far is the fact that the conservation problem is a very, 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 very complex problem. There's many aspects to it. There's many moving parts. And there are many ways in which an individual can make a positive impact. And because of that, I think every human has the capacity to be a conservationist. And there's a lot of humans on this planet, and I love the idea of all of them being a conservationist. And I'd like to play my small role in inspiring them to be that conservationist in whatever way that they can. So yeah, that's it. Thank you for listening. I'm seeing notifications. I don't know what they mean. I don't know if that means you need to cut it up now. You're over the time limit. I can't actually see, but that's the end of it anyway. If you want to connect with me, hit me up on Instagram, listen to my Conservation Tribe podcast. And if you want to send me an email, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's do some questions.
Awesome, that was amazing. Thank you very much, Blane.
No worries.
So we do have a few questions, but I'm just going to try and encourage people to send a few more in if they have any. Give them the chance to do that now.
Sure. I might just quickly add my in the last slide, I said if they want to hit me up on Instagram. So I might just add my links to the chat now. So if you guys want to connect and ask me any questions, feel free to do so.
Sure, good idea.
There you go. I think that's me to everyone. Lovely.
That's definitely what I'm going to be doing after this. Okay, so I think we have a few questions now, if you're ready.
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so the first one, please can you give an example of digital conservation content? Is it a blend of your architectural design and wildlife?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for me, no. So the thing with content, like I touched on before, it can be a million different things. For me, the architecture component to me, I'm not currently linking to the content that I'm creating now for conservation. Like it's not like it's not an intimate link between the two. So the content that I create podcasts, and podcasts are important because they're a trending thing. And like I mentioned before, it's a good networking strategy. I create kind of infographics that are tailor-made for Instagram. So infographics where they're like world maps where you swipe across and there's like a seamless transition. So the content when I think of creating content, I think of creating content not generally, but creating content that's specific to the platform that you're posting on, and trying to visualize what that user experience is, and then creating that content around that. So it can be a million different things. It depends on what you can create, and like if I was a musician, the content would be music or a poem or something, but that's not me. And so the content is predicated on what your interests are and what your skills are. So it depends.
Yeah, cool.
Pop out answer. But
it seems that you've definitely pulled from your architectural experience to design things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so the next question. What problems have you encountered so far in your first year of doing this, and how have you overcome them?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a problem for me is, so when you think of the digital communication, it involves content. So it involves creating content and creating a lot of it. I guess there's a quality aspect and there's a quantity aspect. And for me, at the moment, I'm creating everything myself. And so the problem that I'm running into is trying to create design content creation processes that are time efficient. Because if you're trying to make an impact, you need to be posting consistently and frequently, but that requires time. So that's the problem, is trying to create time efficient content. And one solution real quick to that is creating a podcast that you record the video and the audio. You can then cut up that video and audio into, say, 100 different smaller pieces of content that you can create on social media. So that's one strategy that I use to be more time efficient. I create one big piece of content, aka a podcast, and then I cut it up into smaller pieces of content for social media.
Yeah, nice. So learning to be efficient basically sounds like a good idea.
Pretty much, yeah.
So there was another one. I think we'll probably do two more because I think we've got time.
Yeah, go for gold.
This is quite, like, I found this resonates
Kia ora.
with me as well.
Sorry, I just saw someone say kia ora, so I'm just saying kia ora to someone.
So how did you find the confidence in the value that you could contribute to the conservation message?
Okay, I wasn't confident in the value that I was giving. I was confident in the potential value that it could have. So when that was the driver for me. I knew there was potentially a lot of value to be had in what I'm doing. I knew that my first attempt, my 10th attempt, my 100th attempt at creating content wasn't going to achieve that, but I knew that was an integral step in the process. So I guess what you need to do is you need a clear understanding of the potential value. You need to have a clear understanding of the problem that you're solving. And once you have that clarity around what that looks like, then that gives you the motivation to be patient and actually slowly work towards that. Like every day, the value that I'm giving is incrementally more and more, day by day, but it's nowhere near what I think it can be. But I know that it could reach that at some point in time if I'm persistent.
Awesome. Okay, fantastic. And finally, if you feel comfortable answering this one, it's can you make a living from what you're doing?
That's the crucial component. That's the money component, right?
Yeah.
And that's a tricky one. So that's why I started a separate business to what I'm doing. So Earth Offline is my conservation brand. And then when you're dealing with marketing and stuff with not-for-profits, there's less room there to work with them from a financial point of view because they're not-for-profits. But the skills that I utilize for that, I can use for a separate business, which I've created recently called Your Social Harvest. And that is specifically dealing with environmentally conscious businesses. So they go hand in hand. So I know I can make money in terms of the marketing. And when you think of conservationists as not just conservation NGOs, you think of it as businesses can be conservationists. If you're an environmentally friendly business, you're contributing to conservation. So I can utilize my skill set for them, those businesses that are for profit. And that's what I'm doing at the moment. I am making money from it, only tiny bits, but I'm only just starting. So it is possible. You just need to think outside the box.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think that was kind of also the whole gist of your talk as well, is looking at the wider picture as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's all we've got time for the questions, unfortunately. Are you able to stick around for the rest of the talk?
Yeah, I'll stick around for a little bit. I probably can't stick around for the whole thing, but I'll stick around for some of it.
Also, so perhaps maybe you can answer some in the chat. So I think there is some that we didn't answer on here. So perhaps you can reply to people in the chat box if you are able to and you have time. But thank you very much for coming. I'm glad you can stick around.
Thank you, Alicia.
No problem at all. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Andrew Ball. He's actually my colleague, but he's also a marine biologist and an award-winning photographer and videographer at Andy Ball Media. So if you want to, you can go and check him out. He is working with Wildlife Alliance in Cambodia, documenting the illegal wildlife trade, endangered species, and the relationship between humans and nature. So I'll hand over to him now.
Hey, thanks, Alicia, for the handover. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Here we go. So yeah, I think this talk is more applicable to those who want to get into wildlife and conservation photography and videography, especially those who are still studying and possibly even graduated. But I hope that everyone gets something out of this. And I just want to share my story. So I'm going to start off by saying photography, or conservation and wildlife photography, doesn't pay. For 99.9% of people who want to get a career out of it, you can't make all of your salary from it. It's not fully sustainable. There are a very few number of people who manage to do that. But I want to share with you my story. It's, I guess, quite a strange and weird one and not the normal route. And I want to share with you, show you how you can at least in part make it pay. And yeah, why you shouldn't stop pursuing it as a career if you want to. So like some of you here, I went on to university to study marine biology. So I always had a fascination with the oceans as a kid. I was obsessed, to put it by the least. I actually got that obsession from images. And yeah, I went on to study marine biology and I joined in first year, and I loved the content that I was learning. I was loving everything. I found it fascinating. But I very quickly fell out of touch with my degree in the first year of university. I don't know what happened, but I didn't want to go down the traditional, or at least I thought was what was the traditional career route of research and consulting in marine biology. And yeah, I very quickly fell out of touch. I was in my first year of university. I love marine biology. I always had. I love conservation in general. And I was a little bit nervous. I just committed to a 4-year course. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be there. But yeah, how it all changed for me. I went on holiday. I was lucky enough to go on holiday with my family. I saw a coral reef. And a family relative actually lent me a compact underwater camera, just a small camera with a plastic housing. And I took a few photos and it blew my mind. Basically, I knew from that point onwards, I loved the whole process. I knew that I wanted to be an underwater photographer. Didn't know how it was going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to be it. So I got back from that trip. I got back to university. I was ready to finish my degree, but I knew that I wanted to be an underwater photographer. And I told a few people, told quite a lot of people. And I came back to that same phrase: don't do it. Photography, or conservation photography, particularly wildlife photography, won't pay. There's hardly any underwater photographers who do it full time. That's the reality of it. And I was very upset about this for a little bit. I was a little bit unsure. I was back to square one. I wanted to underwater photography. I was then put back to not knowing if I could make a career out of it. But I ignored all of that advice anyway, and I decided to buy myself a compact underwater camera. I bought this 5 years ago, I think, at the start of university. It's still the same camera I do most of my shooting for underwater because it's so small. It's great. It's a great little camera. And yeah, I saved up. I bought this camera. Bought a housing, just a plastic housing, and I had a relative who lived on the south coast of England, and I wanted to go down there and document the species that lived in rock pools. So anything living in the intertidal zone, I wanted to go document it. And for anyone who's ever been down to the UK coastline, you'll know it's a pretty miserable place outside of summer. But I spent 4 or 5 days camping by these rock pools. I was getting obsessed with these rock pools. I was drawing out maps of them, drawing out where every individual species lived. I was photographing these species, and it turned out with about 5,000 images of what looked like this, basically mud, dust. If anyone's from the UK and you've ever been in the water around it, this will be a familiar sight. And yeah, I came back with about 5,000 images that were pretty awful. So you can imagine I just spent, saved up for this camera. I wanted to be an underwater photographer. I spent 5 days in pretty miserable conditions with not much success. And yeah, it didn't really matter because I liked the process. I loved the whole process of going out, documenting species, even if it didn't really mean I was documenting them for this short period because the photos were so awful. But yeah, I loved the process. Everything about it just did something for me, and I still wanted to pursue underwater photography as a career. And yeah, for those who don't know, this is snake lox anemone. It's a very common species that lives on the UK coast, beautiful species of anemone. So yeah, I wanted to stick with underwater photography. So I spent the next 2 years of my degree practicing with this camera, reading every book, going on forums, just becoming a bit obsessive about it. And that whole process managed to land me an internship with this guy called Tom, who works for Hydromotion Media. I'd really recommend anyone checking out his work. He's based down in Cornwall. So Tom documents underwater species for people like BBC, Springwatch, BBC Autumnwatch, Royal Society of Wildlife Trust, Natural England. He documents these species through film and photography. And yeah, I was lucky enough to have an internship with him. He basically taught me everything he knew. And yeah, it gave me a chance to learn how to do videography. And we did some pretty amazing stuff. So with Tom, I got to see some UK marine species that hardly anyone gets or even knows exists. Particularly these nudibranchs down here at the bottom left. They're beautiful. Oh, sorry. And yeah, one other project I got to work on with Tom in the bottom right was we got to document a new population of the giant goby. So giant goby is the largest goby fish species in the UK. And yeah, I got to document them through film. So for the first time ever, I was using or helping Tom use film as a medium in conservation to document a new population of this species, which to me was just amazing. Yeah, I came away from that internship with kind of 2 big takeaways. The first was, 1, I could make a career out of this. But 2, Tom wasn't just a great underwater photographer. He wasn't just a great underwater videographer, which is the things I liked and the things that Tom also liked most. But also Tom was doing web design. He was doing blogs. He was doing social media management. And he was also great at communicating his science to the general public through his films. He loved doing that too. And I kind of learned all these things as well. So I kind of switched from being an underwater photographer to learning underwater film as well, but also all these other things that can make you a more diverse science communicator. And yeah, that kind of diverse skill set, I was really fortunate to land an internship which turned to a job in the Maldives. basically working for the Maldives Underwater Initiative, which is an initiative based at a resort, but it's kind of an umbrella of 3 NGOs who work in marine conservation. And yeah, I really put that down to having, not just expecting that I was going to get a job as an underwater photographer, but also spending my spare time learning other skills and, you know, social media management, web design, press releases, all these other things. So I could at least do that job, or at least do my role in the Maldives, this new role I had. I would do all these other things that I was less interested in, but I knew was still important. But then I would have, you know, 10, 20, 30% of my time and all my spare time doing underwater photography, which is the thing I loved. And I was, for the first time ever, getting paid to do it. Although for part of my time. And yeah, during the time there, we got to do some really cool projects. I stuck around for a while, and I managed to, be involved in or communicate some amazing research being done. So this is someone from the Manta Trust. They're an NGO based in the Maldives. I did all the photography for this project. It's basically the world's first underwater ultrasound scanner. So an ultrasound, it allows you to build up a picture of the internal tissues and organs of any animal. And this device was the world's first underwater ultrasound scanner connected to a smartphone. So that thing you can see there is actually an iPhone connected to an ultrasound scanner. And we were down at 30 meters scanning the manta rays to check if they were pregnant or not. And yeah, I was really lucky. This was such a unique opportunity to do some comms work. And for the first time, I was kind of doing it independently in conservation, which was really exciting for me. And yeah, just for context, here's actually the baby manta ray from the ultrasound. So I used my images of them doing the ultrasound, and then the researchers from the University of Cambridge and Manta Trust, a number of other organizations overlaid these, so you can kind of see how the whole process works. And then, yeah, another comms project that I'm really grateful to have been involved in and asked to have been involved in was a campaign we ran. So the campaign was on seagrass removal. So I'm sure a lot of people here know how important seagrass is as a habitat. In the Maldives, it was actually very commonplace for resorts to remove it purely for aesthetics reasons, probably because it's ugly, tourists didn't like it, and quite a lot of resorts were removing it. And yeah, we ran a campaign, and I was really fortunate to be involved. It was a social media campaign. I was really fortunate to be involved with some really talented people during that, and I learned a lot off them. So again, I was diversifying my skill set, particularly those who had done social media campaigns. So I got to know a lot more about social media. And at the same time, I also kind of discovered that you can teach a lot of stuff online. You can teach yourself a lot of skills, which I was doing before, but you can even do things that you didn't, things that are quite complicated in comms. You can actually learn all of these on things like YouTube and other free resources. And yeah, I managed to get some funding together, and we bought an underwater virtual reality camera system. And I learned to make underwater virtual reality films for the campaign, so we could take people like policymakers who wouldn't be so keen to get in the water and swim in a seagrass meadow. We could get them out there virtually. We could influence their decisions in the campaign of whether they wanted to protect seagrass, to develop this emotional connection with this, what they thought was probably quite a boring habitat. And yeah, we used VR in education, and yeah, it opened my, doing this campaign, working with like really talented people and having the opportunity to pitch an idea, take a risk, and teach it myself taught me a lot about what is available online, what is out there, what you can learn just through doing some research. And yeah, my kind of last takeaway point I want to tell you is to take photos or take videos or communicate in general about subjects and stories that you really care about. If you don't care about the story, I do feel like that's not where your best work's going to come from. And if you do your best work, you're going to maximize your chances of getting a career in it, at least in part. And yeah, there's so many stories out there that need communicating. And so this is one story. So just as I was leaving the Maldives, I'd heard from quite a few people that there was illegal wildlife trade in the capital city in Male. And I self-funded myself to go there on the last 5 days of my time in the Maldives, and I documented the illegal wildlife trade there for those days, undercover, pretending to be a tourist. And yeah, I discovered all sorts of critically endangered species that were being sold sometimes in shop windows. So this is a critically endangered hawksbill sea turtle. We even found seahorse, shargreen, this bottom right. This is a stingray skin, unprocessed raw. And all sorts of things that were really quite shocking. So here's a shopkeeper burning a red coral, which is a very rare species of coral. It's illegal to mine. It's a deep sea species of coral, and he's burning it to prove its authenticity in front of me. This was the kind of one of my first projects where I just found a story and kind of saved up a little bit of money and was like, I'm going to photograph this because I care about it, because I'm interested in it. And yeah, I was lucky enough that a local media outlet in the Maldives picked it up, and I hope at least in some part it's contributed in some way to raising awareness of the trade. And there are a lot of great Maldivian activists out there doing incredible work. So yeah, if you're interested in that, I can send you more details. And yeah, even tiger skin was available in some of these shops. So we're in the middle of the Indian Ocean on an atoll, and there's tiger skin available for sale. And yeah, another story I covered, again, purely because I was interested and it was purely out of passion, was the Maldives tuna fishery. So if anyone knows anything about the Maldives, who's been there, you'll know straight away that tuna fishing is so ingrained in everything they do. It's really culturally significant and also economically significant to the country. And they've been doing it for hundreds of years, and they have a really unique technique. So they go out early mornings. So I was really lucky that this fishing boat crew just let me join. Again, I just did this on an off day. I've been trying for a while to get on a boat. And yeah, I joined with these guys. And they go out early in the morning. They go inside the atoll system and they catch bait fish, these tiny little bait fish you can see here, using these nets. And then they basically throw them off these tuna fishing boats to basically lure in the tuna. And you can see here's one of the fishermen basically catching the tuna. So the tuna get lured in by the bait fish, and the tuna get flung over the tuna fishermen's heads. Sometimes these tuna, 8, 9, 10 kilos, they get flung over their heads into the middle of the boat. You can see here in process, it kind of all lands in the middle. This is actually quite an empty boat, it gets really full. And yeah, some of the guys even wear motorcycle helmets because it can be so dangerous if a tuna fish hits you. It can actually knock you out, and I believe some people might have died doing so. So yeah, this fishery had been around for ages, and I was really lucky to be able to document it. And since doing these stories, like, I've really found such value in just finding stories that I'm interested in, and I'd really encourage anyone who does photography or video to do the same and just pursue it as a personal project. It doesn't have to be big. There's so many stories everywhere. You're never short. And yeah, I hope I've shown that at least in part, photography can pay. It's very unlikely, and I don't think I'll ever be at a stage in my life where, although I really wish, I can make photography and video like 100% of my time paid. But if you take risk, pursue your passion, if you diversify your skill set and learn all these other skill sets to make you more valuable, as well as pursue these stories on the side that interest you, you're gonna be able to, at least in part, get paid to do it for some of your time. And yeah, I only graduated 2 years ago now. Picked up a camera 5 or 6 years ago. I'm not that experienced really in terms of years photographing, but you can pick up a camera or do any form of communication at any time. It's not too late. And yeah, there's never been a time more than ever that conservation stories need to be told. So I'd really encourage anyone with even a slight interest just to pursue it and see what happens. And yeah, that's the end of my slides, I believe.
That was amazing. Thank you very much, Andy. Great to hear about all that stuff I didn't even know as well. It was good. Okay, so we have a few questions, and then I think we'll do the questions, and then we'll have a 3-minute break just for bathrooming, etc.
Okay.
So the first question, are there any specific ways that you would recommend for people to diversify their skill set that you would recommend?
Sorry, didn't quite cut out then. What did you say, sorry?
Are there any specific ways that you would recommend people to diversify their skill set in order to increase their kind of ability to conduct science communication?
Any particular like tools you mean? Sorry, like online. Yeah, so I think it really depends on what you want to learn. For me, just from the perspective of photography and video, there's no substitute for getting out there and photographing with a camera. And I think a lot of people are going to ask, it's expensive to buy a camera. It's which is fair, but actually I shot on that compact camera for a while. So even if you're kind of holding back because of that, you can still go outside and shoot and learn a lot just from being out there in the field and shooting. But yeah, with other skills, I think for me, YouTube's been a massive help. Things like Skillshare. There's so many free resources and so many people are willing to give up their time to teach other people. And yeah, I really feel like there's just so much you can learn. But yeah, also I think another one is particularly just for photography. Sorry, I focused quite a lot on photography, but following people who you inspire to be on Instagram, photographers you're kind of really interested in, they'll quite often put out advice. So as an example, a photographer I've loved since I was like 8 years old, Paul Nicklin. He's a polar specialist photographer. He puts out newsletters where he gives free advice of like some of his most valuable advice in an email newsletter. So follow those guys on Instagram. That seems to be the main platform for photographers. And I'm sure you'll get a lot of tips. Yeah.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, so this probably links in with the other one that I asked to Blane about finding confidence in the message that you can contribute. So this one is more specifically, how do you generate wider interest in your personal projects that you do out of your own interest and passion? Perhaps that links back into Instagram.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My personal Instagram is very poor. I don't put so much time into it. But just seeing from those photo stories I've done, at least, in terms of like getting an outcome from it, is that kind of what you're asking, right? Like how do I use those images to make measurable change?
Yeah, I think like how do you reach the wider audience, get a following and that kind of thing.
So yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not great probably at my Instagram, but just coming back to those stories, what I did was I kind of knew some of those photo stories, particularly the illegal wildlife trade, were quite novel. Like no one had done that before. So I knew that any media outlet in the Maldives, there might be a slight chance that they might be interested in covering it. So for me, those stories, getting out to the media was kind of crucial to getting out to the right audience, particularly in the Maldives, such a small place. Yeah, and developing like good contacts and that with those respective media outlets.
Awesome. Okay. So the final question: how did the vendors feel about you photographing their selling the illegal wildlife?
Yeah. So that's quite interesting. I actually had no experience photographing the illegal wildlife trade. I just did it. It was pretty nerve-wracking, to be honest with you. But I posed as a tourist. I was leaving the Maldives in 4 or 5 days, so which made it a little easier. And yeah, I posed as a tourist, and you can imagine after 2 or 3 days, there's only so many times you can go in and pretend to be buying a necklace before things start to get suspicious. Towards the start, it was fine, and maybe towards the end, there were some suspicions, but I think it helped that no one else had been there to photograph the trade there, so it was very much like if no one else has done it, it's unlikely I was doing it too, or I was maybe just photographing out of curiosity. So I didn't really get much negative reaction. I think if you were out there to photograph wildlife markets, particularly in Southeast Asia, you met with a lot more friction because they're a lot more aware of illegal wildlife markets are a lot more aware there of the presence of potentially journalists and photographers trying to capture those photos or tell those stories. So yeah, vendors were pretty relaxed in the Maldives in terms of me taking photos.
Maybe that makes it more important that you're communicating the message, because clearly people didn't know about it so much.
Yeah. And like, just on that topic, like in terms of photographing the vendors, I was very careful about telling that story in a certain way, because obviously, it is their livelihood essentially. They are making a living off it, so you do have to think about the moral values of how you portray those photographs. So I think that was kind of one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for speaking today. Are you able to stick around to answer the other few questions that are in the chat as well?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Remind them of the poll.
The
Poll.
poll, yeah. No problem. Sorry, Bene just came in. So, yeah, thank you to Andy. So now we're going to take a quick 3-minute break. Please don't forget the poll. Please get involved and choose what you think is the answer. And I will be answering it after the break. And then we will also have our final speaker, Florian. So yeah, enjoy the break for 3 minutes. We'll come back at 5:37.
Guys, do not disconnect. Just stay there.
Okay, I hope everybody had a good break. So now we're going to turn to the poll to see what everybody said. So yeah, the illegal wildlife trade is one of the main reasons that conservation is needed, unfortunately. So it's important to have a look at what it says, and it was good that Andy already brought it up during his talk as well. So 62% of people said pangolins, and that is indeed correct. Pangolins are the world's most trafficked non-human mammal. Pangolins are trafficked for their scales to use in traditional medicine and to be eaten as a delicacy by the ultra-rich. All 8 species of the pangolin pangolin's populations are in decline due to the illegal trade, unfortunately. But they are pretty cool animals, so it would be a shame if they're lost, so it makes the conservation even more important. They range in size from the size of a house cat to actually over 4 feet, so they do get quite big. And they feed solely on ants and termites. Now, because of this highly specific diet, they actually have quite a few evolutionary features that help them to be really good at this. So firstly, they can close their ears and their eye and their nose holes so that the ants can't climb up them. And their tongue can be longer than their body length. There's somebody at the door. Sorry, everybody. Okay. So we're going to hand over now. Thank you, everybody, for taking part in the poll. That was really, really good and really cool to get everybody involved in that. I'm going to end it now. So you can still see the results from that as well on your Zoom chat. So we're going to go over to our last speaker. Please don't forget to put your questions in the group chat and we will ask him afterwards. The last speaker is Florian Rehm. He is a business innovator and entrepreneur. He's currently the director of WildChain. He combines conservation education into games and other applications, whilst at the same time helping to fund conservation projects. So again, don't forget your questions for him, and I'll hand over to him now if he is ready.
Hi, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, yeah, thanks for the introduction, and yeah, thanks for the invitation. I think it's so cool, you know, that we are all in different places around the world, and we are all passionate about a topic, and you know, we have this opportunity to share. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. So I'll try to share my screen. Yes. So I think you should be able to see my screen now. So please let me know if that shouldn't work. Yeah, I think Alicia's introduction was actually really on point. So I would describe myself as an entrepreneur. And yeah, I guess today it's about storytelling. So I thought maybe I can take you through kind of like my journey from basically students to becoming an entrepreneur, because I know that there's a lot of students watching, and maybe you know that could be interesting. Maybe I can show you a career option that you haven't considered so far. Yeah, so my name is Flo. I'm from Bavaria in Germany, and what you see here is my hometown actually. So that's a city called Burghausen. It's on the border in Austria, on the border to Austria on the German side. And this is actually the largest castle in the world, which is over 1,040 meters. And it was fantastic to grow up there because there's lots of nature around, you know, a lot of mountains, lakes, rivers, great for doing outdoor sports, and also great for animals. And we have actually one endangered species there that is called Waldrapp in German, and in English it's called the northern bald ibis. And this is an endangered species. According to the IUCN Red List, they estimate about 200 to 250 animals left in the wild. And my city had a conservation project already started maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And so when I was a child, I actually learned about this because these conservationists that ran that program did a fantastic job educating kids. And they had a fantastic way how they did it, which I will show you later. So first of all, the reason why these birds are endangered is actually that they unlearned the migratory route. So in Germany, it gets really cold in the winter. So these animals escape the German winter and they go to Tuscany in Italy, where it's much warmer and nicer. And so they have to fly over the Alps. And these birds simply forgot the route. So what the conservationists did, they built this ultra lightweight aircraft, I guess, and they basically taught the birds to accept you know, this plane as one of their own, and they actually guided them all the way to Italy. And yeah, so this is one of the conservationists flying this thing. And just imagine like this, you know, this view, like you fly over the Alps, over the mountains with these birds. I mean, this is amazing. And who wouldn't want to do that, right? So the conservationists had this idea to gamify this, right? So they actually showed, they went to different schools and they created a game. And on the next picture, you can actually see my grandmother trying it out. So this was about, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe. So the conservationists basically built a software, a game where you could basically fly with the birds. And everybody loved this. And they just toured from, you know, school to school. And like all my friends nowadays who are, you know, adults now, they are all very aware of the dangers for these birds, and that was because they learned it very early on in school. And recently, they actually released an app where people can basically track or record a sighting. So if they saw one of these birds, they can basically put the location and the behavior, what they're doing, if they were eating or if they were maybe sleeping or resting, and then share that locator, that data that would feed into a database that allows the conservationists to create a more or get a better understanding of how many birds are left in the wild. So that was kind of like my first touch point with species conservation, and that was maybe the thing that triggered my interest. And then after I finished school, I did my A-level in, I think, 2009. Back in the day, in Germany, you still had to go to the military. So I didn't want to do that. And, you know, I had to write this letter that I don't want to do it. And I asked to do civil service. And so I was looking for a civil service position in my city. And I actually found an amazing opportunity. So I had the chance to become a goat shepherd. And it's not just any goat. It's actually an endangered goat species called Tauernschecken. So I guess there's no English translation for this species. But they only live in the Bavarian and Austrian, upper Austrian mountains. So these species almost died out during the Second World War, which was a crazy story, because the population of these animals went down to about 80 around 1942 or so. The reason for that was actually that the Nazi party basically used only brown goats, because brown was the color of the NSDAP Nazi party. So really crazy, like completely unreal, and they basically didn't want this species because it's black, white, and has, you know, beautiful colors. I became a goat shepherd for 9 months, and I learned a lot during this time. And it was, you know, amazing time, because my job was to, you can see this church here on the right. So this is the same church that you can see here in the middle. So that photo was taken on that hill from the castle. And my job was to basically move or guide the goats from one field to the other field, and it was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about conservation and how to treat animals during that time. And it was amazing, because if you have then babies, I mean, this is such a cool feeling if you have healthy babies running around. It was really, really satisfying to do that. But then the civil service ended, and the real life was calling again. So this was right after the financial crisis in like 2009, 2010. Still the economy a little bit like today, actually, like a bit uncertain. Maybe a recession, headed towards a recession, Euro crisis, and so on. So I was very interested in conservation, but I chose to study something that is very generic. So I studied management and law, because I thought that, in that field, I would definitely find a job. And the advantage of studying in Innsbruck in Austria is that you can go skiing after the classes. So that's why I enjoyed that. And I also had the opportunity to do an international semester that took me or brought me to Thailand. And this is where I met my friend Michael. And Michael is this like really purpose-driven guy who built his own startup. It's like a off the beaten track travel company. And he built it from nothing, with no money, with just his motivation and his passion. And I actually ended up doing an internship with him as well. And then I kind of knew that I did not, want in the marketing department of a big corporation, I knew that I had to do something with startups, something with innovation. So after Thailand, I was really motivated. So I went back to Germany and I started a social enterprise together with a friend in Munich. And that social enterprise still exists today. It's more like a hobby today. So it's called Charity Apparel, where we sell sustainable fashion, and we donate 1/3 of the sales price to an innovative charity. So it's basically charity crowdfunding through social, shopping. And that's also where we learned a lot. Like, we made a lot of mistakes in terms of branding. We learned a lot, about taxing, how to start businesses, how to run businesses, and so on. And I was really, motivated to dig deeper into innovation and into startups. So I moved to Portugal, and I studied innovation and technological entrepreneurship there. And the good thing about studying in Innsbruck was that I could go skiing after classes. The good thing about Porto was that I could go surfing after classes, which was also amazing. Also learned a ton, tried to start different companies. We had 2 companies that basically failed there because of patents, and basically patent trolls not giving out the patents for, it's another story, but also learned a lot. And then, I started missing Thailand again. So I moved back to Thailand and I got a job as an innovation manager because I wanted to work more in innovation, and I just had graduated from that degree. So I got a job at an innovation center in Bangkok called KX, and KX is a 20,000 square meter building, like beautiful space. That's also where I'm right now. Full of motivated people, full of incubators, full of technology commercialization programs, full of, prototyping facilities, 3D printers, CNC cutters, and so on. So a real, a vertical integrated startup ecosystem. Where I ran a lot of workshops. So I'm on the very right in the middle. So I ran a lot of design thinking, human-centered design workshops, creative problem workshops. We made it always a lot of fun, gamified everything. That was always my thing, gamifying things. And we ran hackathons, coding competitions. So where basically people get a challenge from a corporation and they try to code a solution within, let's say, 48 hours. And while I'm doing these things, I always keep hearing these super sad, messages that, animals are dying out. The Spix macaw bird, or here, I'm sure this image that was shot by Amy Vitale. And this is, of course, Sudan, the last northern white rhino. And I don't know, but this picture had such a big impact on me that, I couldn't kind of let it go. So we started, thinking more about, what are the drivers of extinction? And then I found out that there's many, many different reasons why animals are extinct. But, some core reasons are, over-exploitation through poaching, logging, too much hunting and fishing, and so on. And then everything related to the destruction of habitat, like agriculture and urbanization. And then I thought, okay, how many species are actually endangered now? This is actually an outdated data. It's unfortunately more now. So more than 31,000 species threatened with extinction now, according to the IUCN Red List. And you have entire species groups threatened with extinction. For example, 40% of all the amphibians are endangered. And so conservationists know this, and many of them have ideas how to tackle these problems. And I think you, with your background, know this much better than I do. But one thing that is definitely needed is more funding, because these conservation initiatives are dramatically underfunded. So it's about 51 billion per year going towards conservation. What we need is something about 400 billion So what we need to do is we need to scale conservation funding. And then I looked into, okay, where is the money actually coming from right now? And you can see that most of the funding actually comes from governmental, spendings like governmental grants, philanthropy, and so on. And I thought, this is very hard to scale. It's very hard to convince governments to give 7 times more than they're already giving, or it's very hard to convince someone who is maybe struggling through a pandemic or like a economic recession to donate more money. So that's why I think it's very interesting to look at market-based activities. So how can we use products, and how can we use other market-based activities to raise money? How can we tap into money that we previously didn't tap into? So what we need to do is we need to complete completely novel fundraising strategies and structures. Just asking people for donations is not enough anymore. There's a lot of donor fatigue. People stop caring because of lack of transparency. One newsletter per month is not enough. And organizing a World Elephant Day is not enough. It's fantastic for awareness and but it's not enough. We need to change the way we raise funds. And that's what we're trying to do with WildChain. So what I like to call WildChain a non-profit conservation innovation lab. So we started this last year in Singapore, and basically we want to come up with solutions and with tools for people to help and to engage in conservation initiatives. So we see a huge opportunity in entertainment. So if you look at, for example, just the very first Lion King movie, that's just the first movie, not the second movie, not a musical. It generated $9.1 billion US. If you look at the Lion Recovery Fund, gets the biggest lion charity in the world, gets 4 million per year. So there's a huge opportunity to use animals, entertainment, and we especially see games as a fantastic medium to engage with people. There's 2.5 billion gamers in the world. They generate $152 billion per year. Half of that is already going into mobile games, and most people already have smartphones. So that means that they are able to participate, they're able to engage, they're able to play games. There's a new trend. So the first game that we are working on is a blockchain-based game. And the blockchain technology has recently made possible a new niche within gaming. It's called a digital collectible market, where you basically tokenize assets. You create digital assets and put them on the blockchain as a token, as a coin. And you can see here what they call a crypto kitty. And there was a big hype some time ago. And this is actually the most expensive crypto kitty ever sold. So you can maybe guess maybe you can put that in a comment. Maybe you can guess real quick for how much that was sold for. Maybe just a rough guess. Maybe you could put it in the chat and just guess for how much that was sold for. I can't see anything. Okay, there are comments. Okay, I can't read the chat. No, here, 150 or 100,000. It's still not enough. It's $170,000 for one digital cat. This is insanity. I don't know who bought it, but it's really crazy. And so now imagine you can funnel that money to a good cause. So that's why we had the idea we need to create games for good, right? So our first game is called WildChain Save the Savannah. And it's a mobile game on iOS and Android. It's going to be released in October. we are releasing an alpha version next month for our Kickstarter backers. Then we're gonna do a lot of testing and designing and coding, and in October the game will be live in the app stores. So what's happening in the game? So in the game you become a digital conservationist, and it's your mission to protect the endangered species in your very own wildlife sanctuary. So you can get a magic egg, and that magic egg hatches into a random endangered species. Maybe you get a honey badger, maybe you get a lion, maybe you get an African wild donkey that is critically endangered, very rare species. And they start off as a baby, and then you can basically take care of them and raise them up to a young adult, to an adult. And it's a very social game, so you can also collaborate with your friends. You can visit their wildlife sanctuaries, they can visit your wildlife sanctuary. And so it's your job to keep them safe. There's a lot of interesting mechanics from the real world fed into the game. Everything in the game is based on real world data. We feed real environmental data from OECD and UN Environment into the game. The animals behave like they would behave in the wild. We have an amazing game loop that I can't share everything yet, but it's going to be, I think, very, very cool. You can imagine this game as a mix of Tamagotchi meets Pokemon Go meets Farmville. I think that describes it. But the reason why we are different is that the technologies that we're using really like cutting edge technologies. We're using blockchain for creating scarce non-fungible tokens that are basically a digital representation of the animal living in the wild. Let's say there's 7,000 cheetahs left in the wild. There's going to be 7,000 cheetahs in the game as a digital counterpart on a blockchain that guarantees you the scarcity and that guarantees the true ownership of that asset as well. Plus, we want to use cryptocurrency to donate to charities, which means that it's going to be very transparent. There's not going to be remittance fees. The different currencies don't matter anymore. So it's a much more effective, much faster way to give to charities. And as I mentioned, we are using the IUCN Red List as our data oracle, where we create the most accurate estimation of species in the world. I think I mentioned before, we are a non-profit, and we want to give 100% of our profits to wildlife conservation initiatives. The way we're doing it is a bit different. So we actually want to gamify giving. And so giving is going to be part of the game. And for example, if you plant a tree in WildChain, you're going to plant a tree in the real world. In our case, we're going to start in Mozambique, in Maputo Bay, where our tree planting partner will plant mangroves. And there's going to be other in-game, elements and in-game, features that are going to trigger real-world impact. There's also going to be fundraising for each species. So we are gamifying that with leaderboards, with badges, with awards, with different gamification metrics. And at the end of the day, we want to, raise funds. We want to really raise awareness. Imagine giving this to kids. If the kids play it at a younger age, they're going to be aware of the problems, because we integrate the threats that these animals are facing, the real threats, into the game. So they learn about these threats in a playful way. They learn, although they don't even know that they are, learning. So we're tricking them into learning. And we want to make it very transparent, because the lack of transparency is one of the biggest reasons for donation or donor fatigue, where people stop caring and stop donating for a cause. For the charities and the project is good as well, because we can help them to reduce the time to money. They spend so much time writing grant proposals, and it's very uncertain. Maybe the they're going to get the grant, maybe they're not going to get the grant. So I want to help charities to, empower them to do whatever they want to do, and to really do what their mission is, and not spending so much time for grant proposals while competing against huge organizations like WWF or UN Environments for the same grants. And at the end, we want to communicate the output and really share what the people have impacted. That's why we're going to have an impact dashboard in the game where the people can see what they have impacted. So yeah, our approach is crowdfunding, is gamification and transparency. And we think with these tools, we can create a new experience for the people to, what we really want to do is we want to empower everyone to participate and to do something good, something small. Doesn't have to be a big donation, but just by, for example, playing a game, contributing. We are also doing a couple of other initiatives. So we are right now working on a campaign with UN Environment for the World Environment Day on June 5th. We are organizing beach cleanups. We are organizing gamified tree plantings, and we are hopefully launching a huge art exhibition in October. It was supposed to happen right now, but we had to postpone it because of COVID-19. We already have the 30 biggest artists in Thailand confirmed. And so we basically use our tools with gamification and fun and entertainment, and apply that to many different areas in order to raise funds for conservation. So which brings me to the end. So if you're interested in the game, you could scan this QR code. I hope that works with the connection and everything. This goes to our website. You could enter your email there, and we're going to email you when the game is live in October. And we are also giving you a free magic egg, and that free magic egg is gonna hatch into an endangered species. And you can always contact me via email or also on LinkedIn. And yeah, if you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Flo. That was really, really good. Okay, so we have a few questions, if you're ready to answer those.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one is actually from Kieran himself, one of the organizers. And Kieran says, what advice would you give your younger self on getting into conservation, or would you give to a young person starting out in conservation?
I think it's so. This is something I always thought about. About which direction you go. Do you become a generalist and do you learn about a lot of things a little bit, or do you become a specialist? So if you study something in the conservation field, you might limit yourself to that field, and you might miss out on other opportunities. So what I would recommend myself is, to learn, maybe to identify one or two like core skills that you want to learn, and then combine that with your other passion for conservation. So for example, if you learn coding, you could create applications for conservation and doing that. If you're a designer, you could design things for with that in mind. So I think being a specialized generalist is a good idea, and I think that's what I would do.
Yeah. Okay. Great. A generalized specialist.
Yes.
Work out what your key skills are is good, I think, and I think that's been evident across all three talks as well. So you spoke about the clothing market and the games world as well. Do you think there are still other traditional markets that can be retooled to serve as a platform for conservation crowdfunding as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, you could do any product or service that you can buy. You can link it to conservation. I think one example would be WWF's Panda. So they just put, I think companies have to fulfill specific requirements, and then they get this Panda seal. It goes on the product, and then in the supermarket, the consumer can see, okay, this is, follows a specific code, or like follows a specific like blacklist or gray list that doesn't touch specific industries like palm oil and so on. And I think you just have to be creative and figure it out. It doesn't have to be code, can be anything. I think it's just a matter of brainstorming and being creative.
Yeah, I think if you're passionate about something, you can tie it in somehow. The skill is always needed somewhere in conservation. And again, yeah, that is the message that we're trying to convey with this chat today as well. So another question was, how have you crowdfunded WildChain so far? It seems like quite a big project, and that it needed funding before you've set it off the ground and got funding from it.
Yeah, this is the tricky part. So we chose to start WildChain as a non-profit because we wanted to show that we are very serious about the impact. So we are actually getting audited every year and have to release every financial statements and so on. So the easier route would have been to start a for-profit company, to go to a VC or a venture capitalist or a business angel to ask for investment. But what happens then is that they basically have a big influence on the product strategy and your direction, and they will force you to monetize your product as much as possible because they expect 10x returns. That's why we intentionally chose the other route as a nonprofit, and we completely bootstrapped everything. We started off. We are not. I'm doing another job so that I can, run WildChain. Yeah, we are still like struggling with that, but we were creative with that as well. We did charity parties. We got a big beer company in Thailand. I don't know, maybe Chang Beer. I think it's internationally known as well. So they sponsored us. We got a cryptocurrency sponsor, and we threw a huge party at the river in Bangkok. And the people got cryptocurrency, and they could pay with that cryptocurrency for their beers and drinks. And we raised about $5,000 with that. We also work with a social enterprise called Social Giver, which is one of the coolest social enterprises in Thailand, started by my friend and co-founder of WildChain as well, and we put WildChain as one of the projects on that, where we raised about 400,000 baht so far. And the last thing was our Kickstarter campaign. So we just finished our Kickstarter campaign last month, where we raised about 22,000 or 23,000 Singapore dollars. And that's amazing community at Kickstarter that are also got not only are our funders, but also are going to be our very first users and people that will give us feedback, our like first 100, 200 like true fans. So I think that's the very challenging part. But for the future, I would like to raise sponsorship money, but we have a very strict blacklist and gray list. So we would only work with ethical corporations. And if we lock down one or two corporations, we don't have to monetize the game that much. So ideally, 100% of the revenue, not only the profit, but revenue minus cost is the profit. So 100% of the revenue goes to conservation initiatives. But in order to do that, we have to raise some more sponsorship money first.
Awesome. So you kind of you crowdfunded this to then crowdfund something else, which is
exactly, yeah.
the true chain. Hey. Okay. So one final question, and then we're going to have to wrap up because we're already going a little bit longer than we wanted to. So within your industry and kind of your skill set and expertise and what you know about, do you have any volunteering or internship ideas for somebody that has more time on their hands than money, and what impact people can make with time rather than money?
Yeah, so we had amazing interns or volunteers over the last like half year or so. And those were all like super driven people who just studied something and needed to do an internship, and they had made a huge contribution. You know, we give them, you know, really meaningful tasks, and yeah, what we also yeah, I think got a lot out of it in the sense of like a business perspective. Like we have to invest a lot of time to onboard them, to teach them, you know, the basics and so on, but all of them like paid it back by like 10x this time investment. And we also have on our website, we basically list everyone so that they get, you know, credit and, you know, a part of that, and we make them ambassadors. So I think, yeah, one thing, when the app is live, we will have a marketing mechanic where people can basically become something like an affiliate. So you get your own code, you can send it out to friends, and you can kind of like be an ambassador for us. And you know, whenever some of your friends signs up, they get a free egg or free, like where we have in-game currency, golden seeds. They get some eggs and some seeds, and yourself get it as well. So we, you know, that would be an option to support as well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, once again, thank you for coming today. I'll just wrap up everything. So thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you for the speakers, and thank you to the audience as well. We hope you have enjoyed everything today. Yeah, the final thank you for the speakers, because they are the most important part, and I hope that everybody's got something out of it. First of all, from Blane Edwards, solving conservation problems by connecting the general public using online communications content to connect people with conservation science. And then Andy Ball, we had speaking next. He was combining his passions for conservation and photography, from documenting rock pools in England to pregnant manta rays, and finally at the moment documenting the illegal wildlife trade. And finally Florian, using his management law and innovation skills to gamify conservation and benefit conservation through shopping, and essentially giving donors more value for money. So finally, I'd like everybody, if you want to, you can turn on your cameras, switch to gallery view, and we can say thank you and goodbye to everybody together. Please, and also finally, a big thank you to Bene and Kieran for organising this. Please keep an eye out in your emails to find out when the next conservation chat will be, and yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that. So thank you very much. I don't know if Bene and Kieran want to say anything more?
Well, there's nothing else to say, but thank you, everyone. And there will be another session, more sessions coming, and we hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you, Flo. Thank you, Andy. Bye-bye. And
Yeah,
Blane.
thanks, guys.
Everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye.